Cachamaniacs.
GeoGearHeads.
Well, welcome to episode 190 of the GeoGearHeads. Now, each week we talk about geocaching and geolocation games. That's why we're called the GeoGearHeads. This week we're talking about benchmarking. But before we get too far into that, Daryl, we have a special guest to introduce.
I do, and well, this is a very special guest because he was actually a speaker at Geo Woodstock 13, and that is MD Surveyor, who is actually a surveyor and a geocacher, and he's going to tell us a little bit about benchmarking. So, first off, thanks and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daryl. It's great to be here.
And we had a question, because I don't know how many people in our audience actually even knew what benchmarking was, and that was, do you know what benchmarking is, and have you done it or not? Well, the responses we got were a lot different than I actually expected. We had 77% say yes, 19% said no, and only 4% didn't really know what benchmarking was. So I was actually very surprised that it was only 4% that didn't know what benchmarking is, especially because, as far as I understand, benchmarking is a term that's only used in the United States.
Is that a question?
No. It is to me. I didn't know benchmarking was only a U.S. term.
Yeah, well, I know that in most of the British-influenced colonies, they're called trig points, and it's usually referred to as like trig point hunting. So like 3 words instead of one big, massive, icky word that's not really correct. But before we get into all of that, MD Surveyor, you want to tell us who the winner was of the drawing?
Okay, the grand prize winner, and very excited to hear his name or her name, is GU Guy. That's GEU Guy.
So congratulations, and I'll send you an email. And I have to admit, I didn't get the email out for the last prize either, because the U.S. Postal Service is holding a whole box of goodies, like ransom or something.
Hostage.
I don't know. I haven't hostage. I don't know. They haven't delivered it to us yet. It's in the system. It's just sitting there idle, at the post office, and they won't give it to me yet.
It'll probably get to you after the elections. So you've got about 14 months to worry about before you're going to get any of your prizes.
I hope not, but I really hope not, because we want to give these guys a really nice selection of prizes from coinsandpins.com, because they sent us a nice big box again.
Aaron at coinsandpins.com is so very generous to us. So Aaron, if you're listening, and I think you are, thank you so much.
Definitely. It's
and
great
guys.
Listeners,
and especially the winners, thank you. Sorry, Daryl, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I was going to say great guys, and I've used them for several of the coins, including the Cachamaniacs coins.
Which are nice and heavy, big round coins.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have the round coins and we have the ammo can coins.
Oh, that's right.
We had the 2 different coins, which, if you're watching the live video, you can actually see over my shoulder. But let's get to some of the points that were brought up in those emails, because they did have a lot of good stuff. Actually, before we get into that, maybe we should actually give people an idea of what benchmarking is. So, MD Surveyor, what do you consider benchmarking?
Well, benchmarking, I guess, is defined by geocaching.com is just the hunting and recovery of these survey marks that have been placed all over the United States and its territories. That these are the marks that are within the National Geodetic Survey, or NGS, in their database. So that's what geocaching.com took that database in 2000 when they started, and so there are all the marks that are in there. So it's just the United States and its territories, and as you mentioned, there's every country in the United States has these marks, because these marks are used by surveyors to just lay things out, where buildings go, where roads go, where storm drains go, where sewers go, all that stuff. But it's just looking and finding these marks and posting it on geocaching.com that you found it.
All right, and one of the things that I know a lot of the people into benchmarking have told me is really fun is hunting for those old railroad benchmarks. That's what they actually like going for because, among other things, they're usually off by at least 500 feet, and it's not uncommon that you'll have them off by much, much higher margin, including someone was telling me one of them's like a mile and a half off where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that could be, and that's the as we were talking earlier, a benchmark is specific. There's several kinds of marks that you can find as you're hunting these. The term benchmark, which is actually two words, not one, is is for a mark that has a known elevation only. It's got a specific elevation above sea level. It's 100 feet above sea level, 500, 800, whatever it is. It doesn't have a coordinate. Then those marks, since they don't have, there was never an attempt by the agency setting the mark to come up with a coordinate for it. Therefore, when you're going out there with your handheld GPS, it could be 500 feet out, it could be 1,000 feet out. What the surveyors did at that time, they would use these old U.S. quad maps, if any of your listeners are familiar with that, and they would scale where it was off of that. Then that's the latitude and longitude that got put on the data sheet. So they were just scaled. So if you look at the data sheet that is available from geocaching.com, there's always a link to view the data sheet. And if it says the coordinates are scaled, and I think most of them say plus or minus 6 seconds is what the scaled accuracy is. Well, 1 second is, depending where you are in the country, but in Maryland where I am, about 1 second of latitude and longitude is 100 feet. So if it says it's plus or minus 6 seconds, well, then it's easily could be off 600 feet.
Yikes. And as we're kind of hitting on already, benchmarking is specific to the U.S. That's most of what we're going to talk about tonight. Some of this will transfer to other countries, but don't count on it, I guess, is the best way to say it.
I guess, yeah, I'm sure there are similarities in the way that the surveying community in whatever state has or country has put these marks out. There'll be a lot of similarities, I guess, with reference marks and azimuth marks to help with the horizontal marks. But what they call them, you say trig marks, and there's some weird. I remember seeing something once in England, but they have a unique name for them as well.
All right, well, let's get to those comments and questions. We'll actually start with one that's in the live Q&A from Paula, who says, can we see the bad cop dance in full screen?
And the answer is no, never. You will never see me dance in full screen. Just itty-bitty window. I look much better from a distance.
And it's chair dancing only anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's going to get me in trouble.
Probably. Sorry about that. Well, let's go on to our first comment in the show notes.
So our first comment comes from DSMS 99. He says, I live in a small town with without many caches. When I've gotten bored at lunch hour, I had no close caches to hunt, so I've hunted benchmarks instead.
See, and that's a great reason to do this, is it gives you something else to do. And like I was mentioning with some of the people who've told me they're really into it, when you're getting into some of it, it gives you that kind of history. But it's nowhere near the sophistication of hunting a geocache with all of the apps and everything else. And we'll get into some of those later as well. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Daryl, I think benchmark hunting can actually be more challenging than cache finding.
Oh, absolutely.
Simply because, cache finding, you're looking for something hidden. A benchmark is out in the open, but, when you go to the coordinates, it may not be where it is. It may be on a rock. It may be in a sidewalk. I found one on the side of a wall. And, they're not where you think they ought to be.
Well, and, I came across, when I first started getting into geocaching, I started hunting benchmarks as part of that, trying to figure out how to use the GPS and the benchmarks, there's benchmarks registered right near my apartment at the time. So, hey, it's right outside. I'm going to go try to find it. Hunted for it and discovered, oh, well, no, it says right in the listing that it's destroyed. That's why I didn't see it. But, you have to go through a lot more effort to find them. And I did finally find a couple of them that were part of the highway mapping. And I came to realize all of these benchmarks, they're not actually benchmarks, I think, along the highway, but all of these control points have witness posts on them. So there's these big, funny, I think they're fiberglass paddles sticking out that I've never seen as I'm driving down the freeway. And after that, I was like, well, there's one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. So it's like every couple hundred feet, I'm noticing that there's a witness post for the survey marker.
The witness post, that makes benchmarking a little easier, or in some ways is as you pointed out, they're flush with the ground, the grass grows over it, and if enough time passes, there could be dirt that would cover it up. But the witness posts were always there just to say, here I am. It would be a flag for the surveyor to find it. So too bad we don't do that with geocaches. A lot of people don't have a big sign saying here's a geocache, but the witness post, most of them do. Back, I guess, in the 30s and 40s, it was usually a metal post with a metal sign on it. But now, just it's quicker to get it's usually these orange fiberglass posts that get marked in there. But that does make it easier if those little witness posts survive.
Yeah, and it's again one of those things that I never knew existed until I actually went out and looked for it. It's right there. It's bright orange. You pass them every day on the freeway, and you don't realize that that's there.
Well, that makes things right out in the open, yet hidden. I like that.
Yeah, well, but the witness posts aren't on the survey mark; they're just near it. So I still had to go hunting for the survey mark, even though it had the witness post there. It just says, "Hey, here, I'm over this way."
One thing that you had mentioned about finding them anywhere would be like on a wall, or they couldn't necessarily be flush with the ground. The data sheet, and I think that that information may be copied over on geocaching.com, that they may copy that as well, but you might have to go to the link. But if it's in a wall, which is very common, and they would be your actual benchmark, because it would have an elevation only, would be in a wall, and it would say that it's vertically mounted. So if you go through the data sheet, if it says it's a vertical mount mark, then you're looking for something that's in a wall. It could be on a bridge, underneath a highway. It could be on the face of a building. So the ones that say they're vertically mounted, it's not going to be, something flush on the ground.
Well, that is good information to know, because, I assume first time I read that information, I didn't exactly know what I was looking at. So it's interesting.
Right, that was one of the things I did at the seminar or talk at Geo Woodstock, was kind of there were some slides that were shown there that had the secrets of data sheets. So it was like because there is like a ton of information on there that would just make your eyes roll back. Some of it's really all this geodetic information, but there's a lot of basic information that's easy to find off of there that would make the hunting for that a lot easier. Like I said, are there going to be reference marks there? So when you go to look for this particular mark, is there going to be 1, 2, 3, 5 marks within a couple hundred feet of it, or 100 feet of it, so you know that you got the actual mark that is listed in on the geocaching website, that's the one you want to look for.
Interesting. Now I've got to read this more closely next time. Now, but before we I get off and start reading web pages, let me read a question from Wet Coaster. He says, I do have a couple of finds in the Alberta Survey Marker Cache. That's GC43F3 Brass Cap Cache. It changes location every month, but it can be logged by finding any one of the Alberta Survey brass caps.
Yeah, I looked that one up, and that's actual virtual cache in Canada. So it appears that in order to log that virtual cache, that you have to find a benchmark, or as in Alberta, I think they actually call them brass caps. If you find one and post on the website the number and the name of it, then you get credit for that virtual cache. But what it appears that this cache owner is doing is actually moves this virtual cache around around Canada, so that way it shows up on other people's searches. So anybody, it's not just sticking on the West Coast or the East Coast or North South. They just move it around, so other people will see the virtual cache and can log it.
Interesting. Now, I have a friend, and oftentimes when he comes to events, he brings a benchmark with him. Yes, it's a traveling benchmark. Apparently, a supermarket near him was being torn down, and when it was torn down, he went and asked the construction company if he could grab the benchmark that was in the loading dock, I believe. And they said, sure, we don't care what you do with it. So he took it, he's contacted geocaching.com, and they said, it's fine, keep it as a traveling benchmark. So there you go. You never know when a benchmark will come to you.
That's right. I got like we said before, I'm a land surveyor and I work for a local government here, and I have, as marks get destroyed, they get brought into my office. So I have a bunch there, but what I use them for is, in order, as Daryl mentioned earlier, that he saw one that was destroyed, the NGS will only mark it destroyed if they're absolutely positive that it's gone. So they need proof. So what I'll do is, if they have a digital photo, so I just take copies, I'll take a photograph of the disc that it's in my office, it's in my hand, you can mail it into them, but then it gets marked destroyed on their website. Now, of course, geocaching.com hasn't updated their database since 2000, so if you look there, it might say you think it's still there, but if you check the NGS's website, you'd notice that it would be destroyed.
Nice. That's something I'm going to have to look at. Now, the winner of this week's contest, that's GU Guy, says, I have 2 official benchmarks on my geocaching profile. I found them in the U.S., on the U.S.-Canada border. I have more on the waymarking site, but sadly they are not recognized on the geocaching site because they are in Canada.
Well, that talks to what we were mentioning earlier, is that benchmarking is on geocaching.com is only for the U.S., period. They don't have anything else. But what was interesting in getting some of these responses is that I realized that the waymarking site has a number of the benchmarks and trig points all over the world. So that might be your better spot to go for creating the or benchmark list that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Your logging. But also, if you find a control point, benchmark, whatever, it's a good place to list it and say, hey, I found it and it's here.
Right, I've had several geocachers that I've got to know. They'll find a benchmark while they're out caching. I'll hear, Pat, this was near such and such a mark, and they would send me a picture of it, and then they would say, I can't find it on geocaching.com, even though this might be in Georgia, Florida, it's in the United States. And there are literally thousands of marks that you may be able to find that aren't on geocaching.com, because the database that geocaching.com created was specifically from the National Geodetic Survey website, the database they have. And the only way to get into that database is there is a specific procedure called blue booking, because the instructions are in a blue covered book, so that's blue booking. And if it meets those, if the measurements were made to come up with the coordinates and elevation, follow those procedures, it goes in their database, and therefore geocaching.com was able to pick it up. So when somebody will send me a picture of it, it's like, as you mentioned, you can put it on waymarking.com if you want to post you found it. It's not that it's less accurate because it didn't go through this procedure, but since it didn't go through the blue booking process, it never made it into the NGS database, and therefore never made it on the geocaching.com.
Interesting. Blue booking because it's in a blue book. You gotta love the government. They're so very literal at times. Well, on to... Oh, go ahead.
That's right. It's just it's a blue book. So that's it. There's many, like I have in my county. There's probably maybe 500 control discs in the county, and I would say that I'm aware of. But you'd have the state highway, the Department of Transportation's putting them as highways go through there, that out of those 500, and it's probably more than that, I would guess that maybe somewhere between 30 and 40% of them are all that you're going to find in the that have been blue booked. Everything else is just that agency did it according to their own procedures and their own needs. So there's literally thousands and thousands of marks that you can find that you can't get in it. So maybe if geocaching.com would open up their database to kind of edit these, but that's I don't know what their plans for it is.
So when you see a survey crew on your local street, they're not necessarily using a benchmark that's through the USGS, right?
Probably most of the time they're not. They would have their survey marks that their instrument is set atop of was probably those values, those coordinates or elevations were based off of an NGS mark, but it's just that the density of the marks aren't sufficient to do all the local surveys, so they would extend it and put additional marks in the ground to do their surveys.
Sounds good. Now we have more email, this time from Mavetju, Mavetju. I hope I said it right. They asked this question: have I done benchmarking? Not in the strict sense of the word, since the right word for Australia is a trig point. The site of geocaching.com.au has a lot of trig points in it. The rule for logging it to go there as close as possible and make a photo of yourself or your GPS and the trig point. There are different styles of trig points. The most common are the two circles stuck on a metal pillar, on top of water tower, on top of post office, on top of wooden pyramid, on top of cliff. Still fully functional. Sometimes half rusted away. Now and then only a piece of metal under a bunch of bushes or brushes. And then you have the newer CORS ones, which are just transmitters connected to a building. Not as exciting, but still counting as trig points. So yes. And the why? Well, for the journey, of course.
I had not heard of those CORS ones.
I want to say cores, but
Well, you're correct. You were 100% correct. That's how it's pronounced. CORS it stands for Continuously Operating Reference Station.
Okay.
And what that is it's a GPS antenna, usually on top of a building, something somewhat solid because it can't move, so you wouldn't have it on a tower that's 100 feet up in the air where the wind could do it. But there are regulations for how tall the building is, what the construction could be, and that's just an antenna, a GPS antenna that's collecting data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's why it's CORS, because it's continuously operating. So we have one on a reference on the top of the building where I work, but it's interesting to see that because that would be probably in Australia they would with their list, but most of the CORS sites in the United States were established after 2000, so you probably won't find them on geocaching.com's list of benchmarks.
So why are they continuously operating? Is it looking for movement in the earth? The shifting of the actual point?
That's a side benefit of that NGS, which is part of NOAA, so the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So NGS is more into like positioning and where things are, but there's other agencies within NOAA that are tracking the movement. So the CORS stations, if they've been long enough, they do use them because actually the velocities of these CORS stations are now being reflected on the newer data sheets that they put out for the CORS sites. But originally the CORS sites were set up to increase your accuracy doing GPS work, for surveying. Not this is, when you get really into like millimeters and centimeters, this is a lot more than your geocacher is going to go with. You can't go to Dick's Sporting Goods and get your survey grade GPS receiver. But for the survey grade ones, the CORS sites assist you in getting more accurate positions when you're doing the GPS work.
Nice. Well, let's go on. We still have more feedback because the wonderful GeoGearhead listeners always send in emails when we ask them to. So thank you. This one comes from Eric in Virginia. It says, a lot of the ones I find, I just stumble across them while out looking for a cache nearby. A few just looked like one should be here and found it. At first, I had trouble finding them on the map. After I found one, until I found a website called Scaredy Cat Films Viewmark or Benchmark Viewer. Scaredy Cat Films Benchmark Viewer.
Yeah, now one of the things we've been talking about is that list at geocaching.com, which is not really apparent anymore because with the last redesign, they got rid of the link. So if you're going to find them over there, you actually have to go to geocaching.com/mark. Am I correct?
Yes, that's it. It's still I guess the web page is still there and the functionality is still there. There's just no longer a link on their front page to get to it.
Right, and you can still log them last I knew as well. It's not like they've turned off the logging ability. But that is a snapshot from 2000. It hasn't been updated since. So the Scaredy Cat Films benchmark viewer apparently is a quick and easy way to go and find the benchmarks from a more updated list.
Yeah, that's correct. I've also found that, and we may get into a little later, that the apps that you can get for a smartphone, I did check. There's a mark not too far from here that I know specifically is not in the NGS database, and it did show up in the app that I have on my phone. So I'm sure that probably the Scaredy Cat Films viewer is probably pulling directly from the NGS database, which is, it's not, secure. You can't get to it. It's available for whoever wants it. So that as well as these apps for the phones are giving you more up-to-date information. If somebody's listed as destroyed, now you're going to find out. So you do get the newer information. The downside is that since geocaching.com doesn't have them in their site, your only option is, if you want to record it, is like waymarking.com or something like that.
Interesting. Well, we have another question from Axeman22. It says, I found a handful of benchmarks. The last one was in plain sight in the middle of Cowpens Battlefield in Cowpens, South Carolina. I could never find it anywhere in the database to log it. And, well, I think we just know why, don't we?
Yeah, that mark was probably never entered into the NGS database, or that it was never, the procedure wasn't, they didn't use that magic blue book to figure out in order to come up with the positions. A couple of summers ago, I went to Grand Canyon, so like everybody else, we're walking along the rim, and there were marks all over the place. There was even a virtual cache right by it that you had to get a picture of yourself by this benchmark, and that's how you record it. But none of those marks, because when I got back home, I checked, I can mark these that I found them, and none of them were there. So I mean, they were literally all over the place. The reason that, one of the things neat about benchmarks, and I think a couple of the emails indicated that, is before GPS, all positioning had to be done, or at least horizontal positioning, horizontal meaning coordinates and vertical positioning meaning elevations, had to be from line of sight. So the easiest place to see was from mountaintop to mountaintop, or in the middle of a field. So a lot of these, if you're hiking out, you go to a state park or somewhere, if you're on the top of a mountain somewhere, there's going to be a benchmark there. There's going to be, I'll bet money. When we were at Grand Canyon, went on some trails, and we were heading up to this point, and I said, it's like, and I could see, way to the other side of the canyon way here. I said, there's got to be one here, and that's where they were. And actually, some of the pictures that Daryl might show later were taken from these different marks, like that are, at these, on top of a real nice view. So going to these places to find these marks, it's usually like a real scenic area.
Well, why don't we actually talk a little bit about the different types, because you mentioned that the benchmark is not it's not all survey markers, it's just one type. And with the survey markers in the database, as I understand it, those are pretty obvious, and I think I've been logging some of the wrong ones.
Yeah, they have the I guess the surveying community usually refers to them as control marks or control stations because they're the stations that control the position and elevations for your survey, thus control. But you would have like a horizontal or triangulation station. That's probably most of those. That means that has a coordinate. It has a known latitude and longitude. So if you go looking for that with your GPS, you ought to hit right on it. So they're ones that would be, that would be the most easiest to find. The benchmark is, as I mentioned before, is one that specifically has an elevation above sea level. And then you have what they call, and these are the most common, there's other ones too, but the most common, I guess, would be these group. Then you have a reference or azimuth mark, and they typically don't have a latitude or longitude or elevation. The reason for the reference mark is to help you find the horizontal control station. Benchmarks themselves, ones that are just have an elevation, never, well, I'll say, can't say never. I have never found a benchmark that had a reference mark to help you find it. The horizontal control marks, or their horizontal or triangulation stations, I'll call them. They'll have typically 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 5 reference marks. So if you find a reference mark, the data sheet will say, okay, the triangulation station is 10 feet from here. It's 50 feet. It's 100 feet. And also, to make it more confusing, I'm saying it wrong, they always put it in meters. So the distance from the reference mark to the control station is always listed in the data sheet in meters. So our, I guess, Canadian and Australian listeners would appreciate that, because that's the way it's listed on those. But they're the most common stations, and as you had on the image, you had up the marks in the center of the disc help you, even if you can't read any of the writing around the side, because the name of the disc, the name of the station will be stamped in it, whether it's a triangulation station or benchmark, that's also stamped in it. But if it has a triangle in it, it's pretty much a good bet that it's a horizontal mark. The benchmarks usually just have some kind of straight line in it, and the reference mark or azimuth mark will have an arrow, and an arrow generally points to the direction of where the actual mark is. So that's the way that you have to go. But it's, so if you don't have the data sheet with you, if you see like reference mark number 1 with an arrow pointing in a certain direction, follow that arrow and you can find it. Another time I was on vacation with the family, we found a benchmark and I saw the arrow on it, and then the kids say, okay, Dad, it's over this way, and we walked over that direction and actually found it.
Well, and this is why I think I've claimed the wrong ones when I went on the benchmark site, because I think I might have claimed the azimuth ones, because I seem to remember some arrows when I was out there, and oh, hey, that's a benchmark. I'm just going to go grab it, because I didn't know any better.
Yeah, the azimuth marks are usually quite a distance away. They're not really close because, as again, with pre-GPS, everything was line of sight. So the azimuth mark was, if they would set their instrument over the triangulation station, they would sight the azimuth mark. So then from that, they're saying, okay, now I'm looking due north, due east. They would have a bearing that would be published from the triangulation station to the azimuth mark. So then they could start doing their work. But the azimuth mark are usually quite a distance away. The reference marks are typically 200 feet, 100 feet. They could be even 50 or 40 feet away from it.
Well, maybe what we should do is actually tell people, we've hinted about it, but I don't know that people actually know why we have all of these survey marks all over the place. And a lot of it goes back to pre-GPS days, of course, but even in the days post-GPS, GPS is not accurate enough for doing most of the survey work, correct?
No, well, it is if you use a survey grade receivers, not of course, the stuff that you have now, I mean, that geocachers use, the GPS receivers that you use are not accurate enough to do survey work, but it's common now for GPS receivers of survey grade to do the survey work now. The only problem with GPS receivers is the survey grade receivers are not woods friendly. You can't take them in the woods, so you are limited to the areas that you can use it. If you take it in the woods, it just doesn't work. So therefore, the survey grade, map, your hiking, biking, or GPS grade receivers work a lot better just because of the signal that it uses to get its position. But they use GPS a lot now for surveying.
So you're telling me survey marks are always going to be in clear view of the sky, unless trees have grown up around it, of course.
Well, when you say survey marks, the benchmarks on geocaching.com, they would have all been out in the open when they were set, because everything was done by line of sight. That's how those positions were done. So they had to see from point A to point B. Lots of times there would be a tower that had to be built over top of it, and if you read a data sheet, it might even say that a light is available at 100 feet above the meter, above the mark. So they meant that there was, when they were doing the measurements, that there was actually a tower set over top of that. But yes, you had to be able to see from one to the other, and it would also have been open to the sky at the time that they were originally set.
Well, and these go back over 100 years, and this all started, 19th century?
I can pull out my cheat sheet here. Yeah, that it started. I guess the first benchmarks started with the U.S. Coast Survey, or Survey of the Coast. It was an act that our President Thomas Jefferson created in 1807. So that was kind of the beginning of geodetic mapping of the United States, was that. So in order to map where the coasts were and the channels, because they didn't have, the highways and interstates weren't available. It was all water courses then. So they wanted to know, what was the layout of the harbors, where the areas that they had to avoid. So they started in the National Geodetic Survey, in its origin was 1807, and the image you have right now is the one in the red is actually the oldest surviving. It's called Buttermilk. PID is LX4113 for those that are listening and can't see the image here, but that's the oldest surviving control station in the United States, and that was set in 1833 by Ferdinand Hassler, who was the first superintendent of the Survey of Coast, and he was actually appointed by Thomas Jefferson.
I find that kind of history just fascinating.
So yeah, these have been around for a long time. And what are the specs for the actual benchmarks themselves? Because I know that survey stakes, survey markers can just be these tiny little things, but I'm pretty sure that benchmarks have some kind of spec, as it's a minimum size or something.
Not really. It was more and I guess when we were talking about benchmarks, we're referring to the blue booking procedures and what NGS requires, but it's really the permanence of the mark, that it can't be something that's subject to movement. Like the oldest one that we had before, that Buttermilk, which is actually north of New York City, so if anybody's in that part of the country, they can go look for that. But that was just a hole drilled in a rock. It had since been filled with concrete, and there was a pipe in it. But then the NGS and its predecessor, U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, kind of came up with the brass disc as the uniform mark that was easy to carry around and put in the ground and mark and identify to put the name in it. But there isn't. That's probably the most common mark that you can see, but it needs to be something that's permanent. Is kind of like the main criteria.
All right. Well, we already talked a little bit about how to find them on geocaching.com and through some of the other resources, but you had a few that you talked about, including the apps. So let's go through those ways that you can find these benchmarks, or, well, control marks.
Okay, there's if you have a Android device, you can just Google or just do a search for benchmarks. But a couple that I found, one's called Benchmark, the other one's Find a Control, and for iOS there's an app Find Markers. And like I said, I believe those use the current NGS database. They pull directly from that, so the newer marks will be in there. Updated information on whether they're destroyed or not would be there. I didn't check, but they may even have the pictures because NGS now, if you if you send pictures to them, they'll put them on their data sheets so you can see them there. It's not as user friendly as geocaching.com, and I know a lot of surveyors, if they're working in a specific area, they'll go to geocaching.com to see if any geocachers have found it before they go out there, so that they're not going to spend an hour, 2 hours looking for it if it's gone. But if somebody's found it recently, that geocaching.com is a easier to use database in order to upload pictures. But I said those pictures I think may even be available on these apps where they're not on geocaching.com through the database. I mean, if somebody found it, the pictures would be there.
I just happened to be looking at Find Markers, which is the iOS app. It doesn't show pictures, but it does have a link to geocaching.com. So there you can get the information, jump right over to geocaching.com and look at others. So, and you can log your benchmark.
If there's a link there to the data sheet, I'm not sure if it allows you to get to the NGS data sheet. On the data sheet, if there's photographs, there'll be a link on it. It'll say photographs with a line under it. Then you can just go right to it. So if these apps will link you directly to the NGS data sheet, then you can see the photographs there. There's a couple other apps that are not apps, but this would be more for your personal computer. But there's a free software called DS World for Datasheet World, and that will allow you to download all the marks into Google Earth. So if people like Google Earth for looking for geocaches, I do that all the time because it helps to find them. That DS World for Datasheet World will actually put those right into Google Earth. Datasheet World was created by a contractor for NGS, so DS World also allows you to upload photographs. You can put your recovery information right there, so it'll show up on the NGS datasheet as opposed to just geocaching.com. So you could put it right there on the NGS datasheet. NGS promotes this. They like the geocaching community and all that they've helped, but they even have another option on GS World where it says upload handheld coordinates. So as you were talking before, that these benchmarks can be hundreds of feet out because they were just scaled coordinates. So now somebody, geocacher X goes out there and he puts his handheld receiver over top of it, he's going to get something that's going to be a lot better than 600 feet. So you can put your coordinates there, and then they'll show up on the data sheet. So the next person that pulls that up will have the coordinates from the that other geocacher found.
Cool. So they're actually inviting the geocaching community to basically help them out with these recovery logs as well, then.
Correct. Yeah, they very much encourage that. And there is, I guess, the only other one that I wanted to mention real quick is that the NGS website itself has a online map. So, sort of like if you were going to geocaching.com looking for caches, you can go right to their website. It's www.ngs.noaa.gov/NGS Data Explorer. And that is a interactive map that'll show you where the marks are, all over the country. So you don't have to go through DS World to download them, into Google Earth. You can navigate all across the country in that viewer.
And of course, we're going to have all these links in the show notes. So head on over to GeoGearHeads.com, look at the show notes. You'll be able to link to all these sites quickly and easily. You don't have to pull over the car and start scratching notes on your hand. Get that pen out and write on my palm because I want to write this address down.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Before we go, we should probably give one other quick incentive for geocachers to actually go find the benchmarks. Is there are actually some geocaching challenges that require you to have found certain numbers of benchmarks. So now, hopefully, we've given you some tools to go and collect some more challenges, at least until they're reinstated and changed by geocaching.com.
There you go. Isn't the first benchmark added to your numbers? And then
I don't think so, but it might be.
I thought the first one was, and then not so much after that.
See, I actually logged a benchmark before I logged a geocache, so I wouldn't know.
Now, I know on mine, I've logged about 80 benchmarks, but I know that not one of them are in the list. It's just my regular caches.
Oh, well, there we go.
Okay. There you go. So now, you're telling me all surveyors know of geocaching.com?
Not all of them do, but a lot do.
Really? Okay.
There is, when I heard about it, when I got started, it was actually like a lot of other professions. You know, you have your own journals and magazines that talk to you about what's going on in your profession. Where there was an article in one magazine, and then months later there was an article in another magazine, and that's what got me interested in it. But that excitement of finding, you know, going to a coordinate and finding a cache, that excitement, hey, I found it, is real similar in land surveying when you're looking for a benchmark or looking for somebody's property corner that you're trying to find. That, you know, once you find it and it's like, oh, there it is. So there was that immediate connection. So I know a lot of surveyors that are involved in it. In Maryland, the Maryland Society of Surveyors, what I'm involved in, there's even a geocaching committee. So I know a lot of them enjoy it because there was immediate similarity between the two.
Well, and we expect that any surveyors who place a cache are going to have good coordinates.
I hope so.
Perhaps they've used the survey GPS to survey quality GPS to place their caches. I would hope so, but yeah. You don't want to blend hobby and work too much.
Yeah. As long as it was out in the open. Remember, you can't take the survey grade receivers in the woods.
You're right.
See, right. I was going to say if they did that, their cords probably wouldn't be very good.
That's right. It's not that they wouldn't be good; they wouldn't work. It just doesn't work in the woods.
Well, thanks again for joining us and sharing all the great information. And yeah, I'm actually kind of thinking I want to go out and hunt some control points or benchmarks or whatever we're going to call them.
Okay, well, thanks for asking me to come on.
I'm definitely going to go download that app and look to see what's around me. So I may go find some as well. Daryl, should we report back next week what marks we found?
Probably not, because I'm probably not going to have found any by then. But we certainly could try.
Oh, I love your honesty, Daryl. Well, I don't know if you know, the block party just happened last week. And at the block party, 4 podcasts got together and came up with a harebrained idea in which you could win some fabulous prizes. So listen to next week's episodes of Podcacher, GeoGearHeads, Land Monkeys Geocaching Adventures, and Caching in the Northwest to find out what iconic Fremont, Washington landmarks each one of the hosts found to be most interesting. Simply title and email Fremont Landmarks, and in the body write all 4 landmarks and who chose it. You need to address that to feedback@cachingNW.com, and we'll have the date for you next week when that needs to be in. So it's a contest. You have to listen to all 4 podcasts in order to be entered, or to qualify to be entered into win a prize.
Well, speaking of which, we have our iTunes and Stitcher review contest, or drawing, or whatever we're going to call it. We still don't really have a name, but it is just going to be a drawing, and all we're asking is that you go to iTunes or Stitcher, if you're on either one of those services, and drop us a review. Be honest. Don't give us 5 stars and glowing reviews just because you think it's going to get you a better chance, because it won't. We're just going to take all those names, throw them in a hat, and pick one of them, and that one is going to get some nice little prize that we haven't even figured out yet. But you have to do that by the end of the month, so make sure that your review is posted by the end of August on either one of those. And you know what? We don't have any, last I checked, on Stitcher yet, but we got some great ones on iTunes. So just drop us those reviews, and hopefully you'll be the winner of whatever that nice small little prize is.
Nice. Now, I don't know if you know, but all of our patrons got a Travel Bug Racer. Now, most of the travelers are still checked into the block party simply because I haven't found a cache big enough to put them all in yet. Daryl, I did find a mystery cache which could have held them all, but I didn't think it was fair to start them in a mystery cache, just because there's lower traffic at a mystery cache than others. But this week I will make sure I go find a Travel Bug hotel and drop all these racers in there. Right now, the Kid Vegas Traveler is showing it's in first place, checked into the cache at the Spokane Geo Tour. And I also had people stop by, pick up their Traveler, and one they said they were taking to Norway next week. So that may get a big jump. I don't know. We want to thank GX Proxy for making all of this happen, for making each one of the travelers and doing such a great job to personalize each and every one.
And underwriting some of the costs of that. So thank you again to GX Proxy. I'm thinking a Travel Bug hotel, though, next to an airport would be especially appropriate, since that's where they're heading, is to a Travel Bug hotel near a different airport over in the UK.
I'm going to go look next to SeaTac this week.
Yeah, if you can
I've got
get
tomorrow off. Let me just run up there.
Oh, awesome. Well, now you got to get your schedule out, because I've got the list of the next 5 shows coming up. And next week, August 27th, we're going to be talking with the Going Caching crew again, this time about the 2015 event. Always a great event. And you know what? I'm not going to make it again this year, Chris. I really, really wish I could, though.
You know, I saw them at the block party. They're a great couple. And I asked them how they make this event so good each and every year. And, of course, they say it's volunteers. But I really want to go. I mean, it is a landmark geocaching event. And it really is, you know, I think it's, now with the block party going away, maybe this should be what we consider going to each and every year, Daryl.
Probably, and it's a very different type of mega event. There are other mega events similar in style to this one, but this is nothing like your Geo Woodstocks, your Midwest Geo Bash, or your block party. This is a multi-day themed event with lots of games. You definitely have to check this show out, even if you can't make it, because these guys have quite the reputation for putting on great events. But let's move on to the next one, which is going to be 192, and that's going to be Road Caching 6, and this time we're going to be talking with the Land Monkeys. Then on the 10th of September, of course, Randomize 37. So get your questions and comments in.
Roman numerals, don't you?
Well, I knew what it was, but it's like 37, man. I'm having a hard enough time believing that we're this close to 200, but then to think that we've done almost 40 of these randomized shows, and I love these randomized shows, and I know a lot of people love them too. And I keep thinking, how can I pack more of them in? So then, on the 17th, we're very excited to have Rock Chalk come back with geocaching.com Guidelines 2. Finally, Project GC is going to be returning on 195. That's going to be September 24th. And again, we already have a question in the Google Plus event page for that one.
Nice. And just to let you know, I'll be using project-gc.com to log all these trackables into a cache. Just going to let you know that right up front. Now, get your emails ready, because we have another question. Can you believe every week we give away a prize? So, get an email ready, address it to GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com. In the subject, put question 191. Here's what we want to know. How many years has the Going Caching event been going on? So, put your answer in the body along with your geocaching.com screen name. Email that to GeoGearHeads@CacheManiacs.com with the subject, question 191. Make sure that's into our inbox by August 26, 6 p.m. Pacific. That's 9 p.m. Eastern.
Check the Cachemaniacs website at cachemaniacs.com for more on the GeoGearHeads, including show notes for this and all of our episodes. We love hearing from our listeners, so leave us feedback by calling 206-350-3647, by emailing geogearheads@cachemaniacs.com, or through social media. Your support helps keep the Cachemaniacs shows coming. Please consider becoming a patron through the link on our website to support the Cachemaniacs shows. GeoGearHeads is produced by Chris Stuffnauer and Daryl Wanberg. This show is copyright 2015 by Daryl Wanberg. All rights reserved.
Guess we're the Cachemaniacs.